We're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming, whether you're with us live or on the replay. We are really excited to be here. Although you probably know who we are, I'm going to tell you who we are anyway. I'm Lynn Maureen Hurdle, known as the Conflict Closer. I am a mom. I am an African-American woman. And I have been doing the work of conflict resolution, diversity and inclusion and equity for 40 years now. And along with my husband, have raised our two sons in the work of conflict resolution, but also they've been raised to have meaningful, difficult conversations. And in particular, around race, they've had these conversations from a young age. And so I'm really thrilled to be here with our youngest.
I'm Justin Naeem Hurdle Price. It's an honor to be here. Hi. I'm 19. I'm an African-American college student. My work in this field and in the work of having difficult conversations extends to basically all my life. You know, I've been able to watch members of my family, run workshops and run, different kinds of discussions on different kinds of different topics. And I've been able to take the reins myself since the age of 10 on some of these workshops and difficult conversations. And so it's great work. It's an honor to be here again. And let's get started.
Here's what we're going to cover today.
Great. So we're going to talk about how to start conversations about racism using 3 methods and examine the importance of each method.
We're going to talk about how you can listen deeply and talk less when engaging in difficult conversations. Especially as adults, we tend to have our agenda for what we want to teach our children and say to our children. Well, we're actually going to teach you how to do less of that and engage by listening deeper.
Next, we're going to give you 3 developmental facts that will help you break down the information into age-appropriate sharing. So really making sure that with the applied ages, you're able to really think about how the information is going to best get to your children and your young people.
Yep. And we're going to share 3 important facts to share about racism with your children. There are many important facts. We've chosen 3 that we think that are really important. If you don't share anything else, you want to share these 3.
Next, we're going to give you 2 techniques for managing the emotions that can come up for your children and yourself during these conversations. These are difficult conversations. These are hard. Emotions will come up, but being able to work with them and not run away from them and use them as motivation instead of a withdrawal is really what we're going to be talking about there.
And then last, we are going to talk about how to make the reading of children's books have the impact that you want on your children when it comes to race, difference, history, and racism. Because that's what you want. A lot at this age, there's a lot of reading of books. And if you're taking the time to choose books on this topic, you want to make sure that they have the impact that you want them to. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about each of these when we get to them. I also want to let you know, Jolene, that we will, along with the replay, and this is really for everyone, be sending out a handout that has all of the points that we're covering today on it too. So at least you can take notes today, it's fine, but also you'll have it for yourself. So what you want to do is start the conversations, right? We're here, that's the biggest thing. It's like, how do I start? What do I say? So Justin's got a tip first.
So this is my tip. You want to be clear that it is not just the talk, but rather the way we communicate with each other, right? And so what this means is, a perfect example is the topic of sex, right? That's not just a one conversation type of let's get all the information out there, topic, right? That's a topic in which as individuals, as we grow and we explore and we figure ourselves out, our values, our beliefs, things can change. And you want to be able to set the stage for ongoing dialogue so that when some of these changes come up with some of these topics, you're able to express them and have them expressed in a very safe setting. And so that's my tip. I love that tip. I think it's a tip that helps a lot, works, just in terms of setting the foundation, right? This is a perfect way of doing it. So to get started, we're going to give you 3 methods for starting these conversations on racism. And the first method that I want to get into is using books, right? So using books is great because overall, you're able to get someone else's perspectives, someone else's mind, right? See sort of how they're seeing a certain topic and see if their values align with yours and with, your own beliefs. And so when it comes to starting the conversation using books, right, you can, we actually have a little demonstration for each of these to just give you an idea of how it actually will look using each of these. And so with books, you can do something like.
Yeah, so a lot of times we use books, right? And so what's interesting about racism and books is that there are a lot of different ways to have the conversation. For instance, right now, I am going to use a book that is not necessarily about race. So I'm going to do this first, okay? Because I want to make sure that we have everything that we need. Okay, so this is a book. I actually love this book. It's so funny because I looked around for all my children's books. I'm like, oh my gosh, well, the youngest is 19, have no grants. Books were given to those who have it. But this is a great book. There's a big, beautiful world out there. So now this isn't necessarily about racism, but I'm going to use it to connect it. And if you are using a story that's about racism or that tells a tale that deals with racism, you can use some of the same method to start. So we're going to say Justin's younger than he is now, and I'm going to use the book, There's a Big, Beautiful World Out There. So we're going to read this book together, and I want to hear some of the things you're thinking when I read some of these things. Okay, Justin? There's a lot to be scared of. That's for sure. Yeah. There's that mean-looking dog. And booming thunderstorms. There are roller coasters. And scary stories in the news. I've been hearing a lot of scary stories in the news lately. Have you heard any scary stories in the news, Justin? No. Okay. Well, that's good. I want to talk a little bit about a scary story that I've been hearing about. Okay, so what do we have to do to prepare ourselves to hear about something scary? Do you want me to hold your hand, or do we want to take some breaths, or drink some water or some tea? What do you want to do?
Water's fine.
Okay, so we're going to take some water. We're going to drink some water together. And then I'm going to tell you about a scary story. I've been hearing a scary story about protests going on. And sometimes in those protests, people are getting hurt. So you haven't heard anything about protesting?
Mm-mm.
Okay, do you know what protesting is? All right, so that's something for us to talk about first. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to say there's so many good ways for this to go in the direction that you want it to go if you plan it ahead of time. So where do I want to go with this book? Well, I want to actually know what my child or children already know about anything that's going on. And I didn't go straight to the scariest news, right? I went to something that can lead to what's happening in the protests and what the protests are about. But what I'm doing to lead up to that is really trying to find out what it is they know, hear, and understand already without assuming that they've heard it or that they're thinking a particular way about it. I'm using this book that, like I said, is not even about racism. I'm using it as a way in to have ongoing dialogue, because it doesn't have to be long, particularly with young children. And we already know they lose interest pretty quickly, and it isn't as deep for them all the time as it is for us. But chunking it down into bite-sized conversation that you can come back to and continue to read the book together is one way to start the conversation.
Yes, yes, very effective, very useful, right? Especially the piece about, sort of leading into, right, not giving away, the scariest news, right? Not scaring away, not taking away anything from the conversation, but really making sure that the build up and the setup to it is as strong as the topic itself that you're going to be addressing. So yes, that's perfect. Um, so next, what we want to get into, the next method that we have is using current events, right? And so being able to tune into, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the news, right? It's scary stuff, scary times that we're in, right? And it's, these are things that are going on, but, we can't run away. We can't turn away from what's going on. We have to be able to really understand truly at the root, what I'm saying, what's happening, and express those things onto your children as well. And so here's another way that we can get into this.
So here's the funny thing is that if you see with that last book, I actually moved into a current event. So you can combine them, but we want to start a conversation. Let's say specifically you want to start a conversation about a current event. Well, one of the things about this kind of conversation is that it can take place in the moment. It doesn't necessarily have to be planned, although it's fine if you plan it, particularly for younger children. But it can take place in the moment if you are watching the news. I don't tend to watch the news a lot, so but I have older children who tend to be on social media, but smaller, younger children, even 10-year-olds aren't there yet. So we aren't sure how much they've heard. So if you're in the moment and you can talk about, let me demonstrate a little bit and just say, so Justin, I want to talk about something that happened today that I think is important for us to know about. Have you ever heard of the name John Lewis? No. Okay. Well, John Lewis is someone I think we really should know about. And today, John Lewis, they had a beautiful funeral for him. Now, do you know what a funeral is? Yeah, we've not been to one yet, but a funeral is when someone dies. And we've talked about when someone dies, right? And maybe you haven't yet. So if you haven't, then you want to start out with being able to talk about this, right? When we talk about difficult conversations, death is definitely one of the ones that is more difficult, and yet and still it's a part of life. So we want to have that conversation. But Justin already knows a little bit about death. We've talked about it, but he hasn't been to a funeral yet. So a funeral is where people get together and talk about all of the good things that the person did, and it's a time for them to say goodbye. And one of the ways that they said goodbye to John Lewis is that they took him back to a place that he did something really good in. And so John Lewis was an African American. We've talked about different people, right? Who they are, that everybody is different, skin color is different, and people are from different places. And so there are a lot of things that make us different. And one of those things is what kind of American we are. And he was African American. He was someone who, along with Dr. King, because we talked about Dr. King, he and Dr. King were really good friends. And they marched to make sure that African Americans had the same kind of rights as white Americans. And do you know what we are? are we African Americans or are we white Americans? And of course, your children will say who they are. And I know you're in Canada, so you'll be talking from that perspective, right? But the others who signed up, you're all from here, I believe, yes. And so you'll talk from that perspective. And so what he did with Dr. King is they marched over a bridge. And this bridge was a place that African Americans weren't allowed to cross over at the time that they marched over it. And so one of the things that they did in a way to say goodbye and thank you to him was that they took his body back over the bridge just so that people there could say thank you for everything that he did. So I want to just find out for you what you're thinking about what I just said to you. Right, so I wouldn't go straight to any questions. I would want to know what they're thinking, right? Because maybe they're thinking, this is scary, and I want to know that. Maybe they're thinking, I have lots of questions, and I want to know that. Or maybe they're thinking, why are you even telling me this, right? And we want to know that too, because we want them to understand why we're even sharing this with them, okay? So that's an example of using current events. And that's pretty close to the moment. This happened yesterday. So if we were talking about it, then I might have done it yesterday, but if not, certainly by the next day. Okay.
Great. So number 3, lastly, using questions. This is my favorite. This is personally, I think, something that I've capitalized on and really made sure that I live by for, the purpose of getting answers, right? To understand what's going on around me in the world, feelings that I have coming up, right? So using questions is big because, whenever we are starting to experience something that is completely new, or we're touching on a topic that we've never touched on before, right? Questions are going to come up, right? And so we want to be able to get away from, any sort of negative reaction to a question, any sort of, maybe thinking that, there's a stupid question out there in the world, right? All questions are valuable. All questions, especially on race, are valuable because at the end of the day, there are people out there who really need the information. And, there are people out there who want the information, but are afraid to ask questions because, they're afraid of offending someone, or they're afraid of, maybe they're starting to shy away from their own views or something like that, right? But we want to embrace those moments. We want to encourage those moments because at the end of the day, those are the moments that give us the answers that we need.
So now that we started the conversation, one of the things we want to do is some really deep listening. We're hoping our children are going to start talking, and so we want to do some listening for them, listening to them. And what we're listening for in this first skill are feelings and values. And the way that we listen for that is to listen to what's not being named, because most people don't speak in feelings and values, right? Most of the time we're listening for the content, but at the same time, they often will tell us what they're feeling and what they value in the words that they use for the content. If our children have really good feeling vocabulary, then they're more likely to use feeling words. But we want to make sure also that the feeling words are the deeper words, not just happy and sad, but also that they're able to say things like that they're disappointed, or that they're feeling even depressed, if that's what they're feeling, or anxious or scared, the things that that we don't often hear expressed easily from children, because so many adults take them at the sadness place or the angry place, and they don't really explore what's underneath that. So listen to what's not being named in terms of feelings. Check in with feeling words. So if they say that I'm sad, but they've given us more content around the sadness, we might hear that they're actually disappointed or that they're actually frustrated. So those are the words along with sadness that we might bring back to them. So we might say, so I heard that you're sad because you were not asked to be a part of lunch with the other children, right? So it sounds like you were really disappointed or you were really hurt and it felt really lonely for you. Like they didn't say those words, but we're checking in so that they develop this deeper feeling vocabulary. And then you want to listen for what's important to them. What do they value? So in that, it sounds like they value belonging, right? Some kids, although we all want and need belonging, some kids don't have that same value on it, right? Some kids can honestly say, well, honestly, I don't like those kids anyway. And so I'm just telling you they didn't have lunch with me, but it really isn't something that hurt my feelings because those are mean kids. And some kids just don't even care. They want to belong, even if the kids are mean. So we want to know what is it that they value so that when we have the conversations, we can help them to talk about that and to think it through. And that's why we name them. So we name whatever values we're hearing along with the feelings that we're hearing. So Justin and I actually want to do a little quick demonstration of that for you as well, so that you just get an opportunity to see what that's like, feel a little bit of what that's like. Okay? All right, so Justin, I know that today you came home and you were looking like something happened. And I wanted to know if you want to talk about it a little bit with me.
And kids are just being mean to me at school. I'm the new kid. I'm trying to be nice to everyone. I'm trying to say hi and reach out and ask questions, but I just seem to get made fun of for it. So,
Oh, so it sounds like you're really having a hard time with other kids, and it sounds like you're feeling left out and hurt. And I don't know, are you feeling lonely at all? Yeah, because you're the new kid. Yeah, sounds like being a part of this new school and getting along with kids is really important to you. Really belonging is something that's important to you. Is that right? Yeah, so I'm wondering what you think we should do about it. What would you want to do about it?
I don't know.
Okay.
More kids to like me.
Yeah, we want kids to like you. So, all right, so I won't go into solutioning that, but just to get a sense of, right, that we're putting right away the feelings and the values on the table so that, again, we're modeling that vocabulary for them. The more conversations we have where there's listening like that, the more they start to listen in that way too. And that's the important thing, is that everybody's learning this skill in this way when we're doing it like that. Great. So we're going to move on to the next skill.
Next skill, we're going to be talking about listening beyond our comfort zone, right? So, as we've said before, there are going to be moments in which, whether you can anticipate it or not, discomfort will come up for either you or for your children in these conversations. It's natural, right? It's something that happens. It's something that will happen, but it's not anything to run away from. It's actually something you want to continue to explore, to continue to attack head on, right? And so some of the tips that we have under this, right? So like I just said, feeling into the point at which you are not comfortable, really understanding what's making you so uncomfortable, why you are in the place of uncomfort that you're in, right? The degree of uncomfort in which you are in, and really get into the root of understanding that, right? And so that once you have the root, you're able to work out a solution easier. Next, taking 3 breaths. Now, 3 is just the start number. 3 is just the start number that we put right? We feel like 3 helps, but if it's 5 for you, if you feel like 1 helps for you, right? Whatever amount, we feel like breath is really big in these moments because that's great for just helping recenter your thoughts. And then also remember the goal at hand, which is that we have some comfort to reach from these difficult conversations. Next, we want to encourage your children to continue talking. So if you feel like in these conversations, right, there's certain things that they're touching on, but they're a little too afraid to explore on their own, or you know that there's a little more that they could be getting out of the conversation. So you want to just push a little bit more, encourage that space in those moments to really keep the conversation going and not just end it, right? So if you feel like there's more they can touch on, just say, hey, well, I heard you say this, talk to me about this. Talk to me about where this feeling came from for you. What exactly is causing this to come up? Any experiences, right? Anything like that, really to get them to deeper understanding the root of what they're feeling. And then lastly, pay attention to your nonverbals. This is very, very, very big, right? If a conversation is about to happen or a question is asked and immediately, you hit one of your, as a parent, one of these, or, you're sighing, you're rolling your eyes, something like that, it happens, it's natural, it's normal, but we want to pull away from that because at the end of the day, we want to invite these conversations with nonverbals like that. For a kid and for a young person, from a young person's perspective, it can give off the impression that a parent is, doesn't want to hear it, doesn't want to have the conversation, doesn't, maybe they said something stupid, maybe they, and that is what really creates some of the withdrawal from parents having these discussions with their kids. We want to pull away from that. Yeah. And so next, and you want to listen one point further and pass your discomfort or wanting to jump in and speak. So right here, we're basically talking about checking ourselves, checking those moments in which we feel like, maybe there's something we heard that we didn't like. Maybe there's a point in which that we have that we want to get out that, maybe we just have to get out in that moment, right? Being able to, for whatever you need to do in those moments to check yourself from jumping in is really what this is about. We want to be able to do as much listening as talking in these conversations. We want to make sure that we're strong in both of those aspects of having these conversations. And then lastly, reflect back to them what you heard, paraphrase, so after they're speaking, so what I'm hearing you say is, or, correct me if I'm wrong, or, things like that, to really just help indicate that you're listening to what's being said, but you're also trying to understand what's being said. You're trying to understand what they're feeling. You're trying to really get to the root of that so that you can help in the way that you can from there.
Yeah, it's really important to do. I think we had said it on your show, Jillian, that the 2 ears, right, and the mouth, so that we can listen more and talk less. And it's a place that as adults, when it comes to children, we tend not to always check ourselves enough on that. We do like to hear ourselves speak, and we think we're listening more than we actually are. So we just encourage everyone to use this and to teach it to your children. Okay, so we started the conversation. They're talking, we're listening deeply, and now we want to talk about 3 developmental facts that are going to help you bring the information into age-appropriate sharing, because racism is not a light topic. You know that. It is something that you need to break down. And one of the things that parents are always asking, grandparents are like, so how do I talk about it with my children? One of the things that I have to say that was very hurtful and continues to be hurtful to me as an African-American parent is when I've encouraged white parents at my son's schools that they really need to be having these conversations with their children, and they'd say to me, oh no, my children are too young. And I'd say, but my sons have had to have these conversations at an early age because they have to have them in order to survive. So I know they're not too young. It may be sad that we have to have them at this age, but they're not too young to have it. So let's break down some of this. Okay, from 6 years old and up, children can articulate their feelings and can build a strong feelings vocabulary if we work with them on it. And actually, before 6, and you probably know this, Jolene, like by 4, we can really start to build on the feelings vocabulary with our children and help them to start to really reach for and name the emotions they're actually feeling. The sadness is so pervasive, it seems like that's the favorite, because we don't teach beyond sadness. We don't teach what sits underneath. What is it that made you sad? Like, what's that feeling? So really understanding that we can teach things even like sorrow. We can teach embarrassment. I mean, Justin is the only kid, he was in 3rd grade when he said to me, Mom, I'm really jealous of this other kid. And I'd never heard a child say that before. Like, adults don't want to admit that they're jealous, and we can get jealous at our age, right? Because he had a really good feelings vocabulary and was able to know that he could share and name his feelings, and we wouldn't make him feel bad about it.
And I also see a lot of parents that are babying when they're talking with a 5 or 6-year-old, and they'll say, no, I can't say these words. That's not appropriate. And I'm like, no, you need to bring up the conversation and just move past like that.
Vocabulary. That's right. Absolutely. It's better to know exactly what they're feeling than to have to try to guess. Yeah. Number 2 is children often have a literal view of the world. And so we could be talking to them at times and they come up with these literal questions. So exploring where the question came from with them can really shed light on how to share more information. So if we're talking about racism, and for instance, we might be talking about there is, as a part of the civil rights movement, there were students who trained and volunteered to sit at lunch counters where Blacks were not being served, and they trained to sit there and asked to be served and asked to order food, and they were literally attacked. Food was poured on them. They were shoved and pushed and beaten. And so if a child being literal could be really stuck in this place of, they were at a place where they could order food and the child could say, well, what did they want to eat? I wonder what they served there. I'd like to go to a place and eat. Where was this place? Now, it might seem like they are completely missing the point. And as adults, we might be tempted to go, okay, let's get back to what we're really talking about here. But really, the best thing is to just answer the question and to find out why that came up for them. It's always interesting to find out the connections that our children are making to the information that we're sharing, because then it also helps us to build on that and to go back to the information, because we could simply say, oh, it was the kind of place that served hamburgers and fries, and they weren't able to actually get hamburgers and fries because of the color of their skin, right? So you've come back to it, but you've not ignored the question, and you've not made them feel like they weren't paying attention or that they were off topic. You've actually built that question into what it is that you're talking about with them. And what that does is that says all conversation is welcome here, right? That we make space for the conversations that we need to have, and in the way that we need to have them. So if you're asking literal questions, they get answered, and we can still talk about what it is that we are talking about. Yeah. And that's so important for children, because, children will tune out, withdraw, Justice said this earlier, if they feel like what they're adding to the conversation isn't valued or isn't smart enough. And then the third developmental fact is, this is really an important one for me, because as I said before, the conversations that I've had with white parents are that they, their children are too young. And besides, my kids don't even notice color. Kids are too young. They don't notice color when they're young. But actually, the research shows that by the time children start kindergarten, they have already started to assign meaning to skin color, right? And they look at which dolls they want, and they look at which kids look similar to them. And because we put so much emphasis on similarity as a society, they usually set their preference for those who look similar to them. And in all honesty, too, I'll speak about here in the United States, one of the things that you find, particularly as children get into middle school, but even before then, for safety's sake, when children of color, Black children, children of color, see that they are in the minority, they look for safety among those who look similar to them. But they're not alone in that children, in noticing skin color, they may be intrigued and curious about others, but by the time kindergarten comes around, they've already set that preference.
We're going to give you 3 important facts to share about racism with your children. Very important, very much factual. So definitely encourage that, at some point, these facts are bestowed onto your children. So first, racism is taught by parents and systems. We want to get the idea that you're born racist or anything like that out of the picture. 110%. Racism is something that is taught, right? It is just like if you were working out, right? You're getting fed the information, you're getting fed the data, and you're trying to see the results. And the results are the way in which people go about treating other people who look different from them. And so that extends from parents, but it's also systemic. This is something that, the world, especially this country, was set up this way. And so we're trying to really understand, where that started, where that came from, right? Of course, there was, just numerous things happening in the world to, people of color, of course, but we want to know why these things were even happening, why these things were even put in place, especially for a system, especially for a way of life, right? And so that's really what it is. And so with this, really just start thinking about what, forms of racism you've seen, in parents and in systems, just what do you know of racism really on a larger scale, really in a generational scale, what do you know about racism? So next, it is not enough to just be nice to everybody if you're going to be anti-racist. So this is very big with white parents. White parents feel like if we get the message out that, I'm not racist, we just treat everyone the way that we want to be treated, right? Then that right there in itself is enough to say we're not racist. Regardless of anything we could say in any moment, because we treat other people the way we want to be treated, we're not racist. It's sort of putting them in the defensive, right? Putting themselves in the, defensive, ready to play defense, right? If an incident comes up, they're able to say, well, this person started it, this person said this, so based on me going about whatever I did, that's justified because at the end of the day, I'm not racist, right? Not enough. We want to teach people to be allies. We want to teach really those extra steps that can be taken in these certain moments and how to go about them to show that you really are for people of color. And so being able to understand, when a police officer is stopping a person of color, right? And we have our phones, we have social media, that's great. If you're a white person, right, and you're able to take out your phone, right, you can record the situation, but knowing that an officer is just not going to touch you the way that they would touch a Black person or a person of color is enough to go off of, where you are able to start to physically take action in showing that, you are going to try and protect us out there. And so that's just in terms of getting into really stepping away from just, getting out there that we're not racist, but taking that extra step towards being an ally for us. And lastly, like we've been talking about, setting the stage for ongoing dialogue, right? Not talking about this doesn't make it go away for anyone and everyone. Race is an issue that we have to talk about. It's an issue that we really have to get to the bottom of. It's an issue that we really have to start making, some more real change towards. And the only way that we can do that is by having these discussions. It's not from running away. It's not from, making up excuses for anyone and anything. It's being able to look at the facts of what's going on in the world when it comes to race and being able to face those facts, right? These are difficult conversations. We know this. Emotions are going to come up, right? We're just trying to make sure that people know that these things are okay. These things are part of the process for change to actually come about.
Yeah, because it's not an easy thing, and it's not something that's been happening. And we have to, as we said, we're having the conversations daily in our families, and we're not alone. That I don't know an African American family that's not having these conversations, right? And yet white people are not, and we really do. Here's the world changing in such a way that I hear so many people that are proud of the friendships that their white children are making with people who are different from them, and yet the conversations about really how to be allies to them are not being had. The conversations about racism are not being had. It isn't enough just to be the friends. I often would be concerned about my sons in friendships with white children, not because they were white and I didn't want them to be in friendships with white children, but because I knew their parents weren't preparing them to be allies, and therefore thinking that the world treats everybody the same was likely to get one of my sons hurt or killed because of the thought that, as a white person, I can say whatever I want to say. That isn't even a conscious thought. It's just a reality of how it is, that the world treats white children different than black children. So if you are out with my son and you decide that you want to talk back to this police officer because they are saying something or doing something to my son that is wrong, what you do and say could put their life on the line. Too many stories of white people who have encountered that, and even in protests have been taken and told, you leave, and their black friend is there, and they already know, oh my God, something bad's going to happen to them. Or too many stories of white children who are treated very differently, and then the black friend pays for whatever it was that was done by everybody. It's the black child who is the one that's going to be punished as a result of it and taken away. And so it's really important for white families to start having ongoing dialogue.
And just to expand really, really quickly on why everything is important, is because these conversations need to be had with family, I feel like, especially speaking from a young person's perspective, right? Being that young people honestly thrive, and you can even see certain young people making a living off of, social media and things like that, right? False information is easily spread throughout, media, throughout, it's easy to just attract the attention of a young person towards something that's honestly just nowhere near the stratosphere of a conversation like this, right? But we want to bridge that gap between kids having these conversations, not having the information with their friends, to kids having these conversations without the information to with their family, right? Kids know at the end of the day when they're brought into this world that someone else brought them in. There is someone that's older, that has more knowledge, more wisdom, more experience on this earth than we do, right? And so knowing that, you can really direct us, in the right direction, which is having these conversations in a household where it is safe to have these conversations, right? Again, certain things are going to come up, certain feelings are going to come up, right? But it's, at the end of the day, it's much more safer to have these conversations and to have the information and your values and your beliefs, sort of set, and that foundation sort of set before projecting them out into the world.
Yeah, especially, I realize at certain ages, and earlier these ages are coming, our kids are listening more to their friends than they are to us. But I always wanted to know that my kids knew they could talk to me because we were always talking, right? Not, my mom would always say, oh, you can talk to me about anything, but I never really could, number one, because her reactions didn't line up with that, and number two, because we didn't have ongoing conversations. We just had the talk she wanted to have about me, right, and my behavior, as opposed to what was going on, right, in the world, in my life on a daily basis.
That's huge, because all that it did at the end of the day was provide me with knowledge, wisdom, information, right, data that I can start to apply out in the world. But from just having numerous conversations about just, different topics, like, easier topics that are just, much more on the surface, easier to present, to topics like this, I gained friends out of this. Like, I see my parents as my parents, obviously, and they're the people who look out for me and the people who, they have my best interests at heart. That's what it is, right? They're my parents, they're my care seekers, right? But I have now an even more developed relationship with them that's almost on a friendship level, to which, there's no discomfort bringing anything up, right? You can know going in, right? You can anticipate, like I said before, going in, when certain conversations are going to be difficult, when certain points that are going to come up are going to be difficult, and dealing with it is difficult. But at the end of the day, knowing the relationship that we have from having all of these types of conversations, I've now gained people that I know I can trust with, not just my life, just based off, a parent-kid relationship, but genuinely I can trust with my life based off the information in which they presented to me. So there's just nothing but benefits from really making sure that, your beliefs and values and things like that from a kid's perspective with things like this are set in the household with the people you can really be safe around before projecting it out there in the world, where false information can be spread.
Yes, and will be spread.
Will be spread.
Yes, and it's so interesting because so much of what I'm seeing now, our children are getting on social media earlier and earlier. And yes, we can stop. We can put our controls over that, but eventually, it just happens. Yeah. That's what happens. And so much is happening now around recruitment of white children into these into these racist groups, right? And that is because they don't have the ongoing dialogue to counter what's being taught to them, right? Yeah. Okay, so emotions are going to come up. We've talked about that. They come up, and what we want to do is help you to manage that, because I know a lot of parents are afraid of what their children will feel in these conversations, particularly as white parents, because what comes up for them as they are doing the work is guilt and shame, and they don't want their children to feel that. So we really want to give you 2 techniques for managing the emotions when they come up for your children and for yourself. And the first thing is to feel, sit in, appreciate, and use your emotions. And to do that, what you need to do is to tune into what it actually feels like, to feel an emotion that's intense, like fear. I use fear as an example. What does it even feel like to feel fear? Because most of the time what we try to do is to run or divert or check out, right? But what happens when we actually feel? And to do that, you want to know, what does it feel like in your heart? And then in your mind, right? What's that feel like? Does it feel like your mind's racing? Does it feel like your mind is doing negative self-talk? And then where in your body does it show up? I know for me, fear, besides my heart, shows up in my stomach. And my God, like I could feel it. It's heavy. It just doesn't feel good at all.
I start to get headaches.
Okay.
I start to overthink, stress, and a lot of that from the brain just comes, from the brain. So me, it's headaches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So thinking about that and actually experiencing that and sitting with it, and then choosing to be fully present no matter what. That is such the hard one in this moment when you're talking about racism with your children and this feeling comes up and you just want to go, okay, you know what? Enough for today. You know, we don't need to talk about it anymore, as opposed to just being fully present. Like, what's it like to have the conversation while fear is present? What's it like to have the conversation while shame is present? What's it like to have the conversation while guilt is present? What's it like to have the conversation while sorrow is present? You can have the conversation in the presence of those emotions. And that's what you're really trying to teach yourself and your children. And because you're tuned in, you can feel and use the energy from that intensity to stay engaged. So one of the things that I will do in that type of moment is I actually do a lean forward to remind myself that I want to stay engaged. Like, I don't want to do this, which is I want to withdraw from this. This really, I hate this. I want to say, I can have this conversation with these feelings. Yeah.
So before we move on, I just want to say, as a young person, children are exposed to a lot of information at a very young age, whether you want them to be or not, right? There are certain things you can control, like we said. There are certain things that are just inevitable that, you know, are going to be presented to your kids, right, as they're out living their lives. And so making sure that everyone knows really good breathing techniques is very, very key for this. Before any difficult conversation, you want to start with belly breathing and insert breathing pauses when you sense that the conversation is starting to get quiet, or, you know, a lot of information is, you know, coming in and a lot to take in, right? Being able to really look out for those moments and know going into when you're going to have to recenter, when you're going to have to regather is really important.
And you know that we talked about breathing, right? When we talked with you, Jillian, on your show, because I'm just such a big believer in it, and I've seen the results of it. So what I like to do when we're going to have these conversations, from the time my children were little, I remember Justin really needing breathing a lot in any of the conversations that he was having, because he's an empath who feels things very, very deeply. And the breathing really helped to center him, not to make him any less, not to make his emotions any less valid.
Or to silence me.
Right.
Like
nothing like that, but to be able to help him to say what he was feeling and why he was feeling it. We did a lot of breathing. And so what we're going to do now is to do some belly breathing so that we have the opportunity to experience that together. And also I want to get it on this video so that you'll have it and be able to use it as a guide for yourself if you aren't already doing breathing, and even if you are. So I'm going to ask that we get comfortable, sit comfortably. And if you feel comfortable, I love the head rolls, the neck rolls. Yep. If you feel comfortable enough to close your eyes, then to do that. And then just to tune into the breath and just notice it. We're not going to fix it. We're just going to notice it. And then we're going to, what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to breathe in to the count of 3 through the nose, and we're going to hold it for 3. And then we are going to breathe out through the mouth to the count of 3. And we'll do that 3 times. So breathing in through the nose, 2, 3, and hold, 2, 3, and breathing out through the mouth, 2, 3, breathing in through the nose, 2, 3, and hold, 2, 3, and breathing out, 2, 3, And one more time. In, 2, 3, and hold it, hold it, hold, and push it out. 2, 3. And then just be there, stay there, stay there, stay there. And then we're just going to open our eyes and come back together.
So we're going to be talking about how to make the reading of children's books have the impact that you want on your children when it comes to race, difference, history, and racism, right? And so when I say impact, right, when having these conversations, a perfect example could be, do you want your child to be, curious? Do you want them to be the question asker, the one who has no problem raising their hand in class or, coming to you about anything at any time with any sort of question, right? The curiosity type. Or do you want, an activist type, the one who would seek those answers, in terms of physical change that they could make, whether it's in that moment, whether it's for the greater good, right? An activist who wants to just really, really put themselves out there more, right? Those are just two examples of the actual impact. But here's just some of the things that we wanted to get out there. So first, you just want to make sure you've read the book before you read it with them. This seems like something that honestly, like, we shouldn't have to say, or you wouldn't expect to have to say, but I think those are the things that need to be said more. The things that you would kind of overlook, right? The things that you would assume everyone knows, right? You want to make sure, especially on these topics, that you've read the book before you read it with them. You want to know and have an idea of really, your values and your beliefs that you're trying to portray onto your children, right? To make sure that the book in which you're going to read with them is aligning with that, so that overall the information is not confusing. It's not too many dimensions to it, right? It's straight, it's clear. This is what it is. Great book. That'll help support what it is that you're feeling as well, that you think, they should start to look at.
And the next thing is to choose a variety of books. Sometimes we choose like one book, like maybe we're looking at let me teach them about the history, right? That's great to be able to get books that teach about history on an age-based level, but then you also can teach through situational storytelling. Maybe there's a story about a little brown girl whose hair is different, right? And kids are making fun, or kids are pulling her hair or trying to touch her hair. That's a situational storytelling that can bring up racism. And so you can teach it through that. And then those that explain racism on their level. There are books now. There's a kid's book on how to teach your kids about racism, right, through a kid's story, right? There are books now like that. And so mixing it up so that it isn't always coming in the same way, so it feels easy for a child to say, oh, not again, I don't want to learn any more history, but that they're getting it in a mix of storytelling. And then they also can decide, like, what's their best method. Maybe we have some kids that love history, so maybe they actually want more of the historical books. We have kids that just love the whole storytelling, right? And if there's a series with a little brown girl, a little brown boy, or Native Americans, if there's a series, I know when I was growing up, there was a girl named Pippi Longstocking, and I loved reading her book. She was white, but what I loved about her is that she was the antithesis of what I was being taught a girl is when I was growing up. She dressed in pants. She traveled the world. She was just brave and brash, and that's how I learned that women, girls and women, could be very different than the stereotype that was being taught to me about them. And that was my preferred. I loved having to follow Pippi and learn from Pippi. So that's situational storytelling. That's my favorite kind of thing. I don't know if you would have one that you think appeals to you more, whether it's history or the actual racism itself or storytelling.
I think all of it for me personally, right? I think all of it has its own values and its own, purpose. And I think for me, I'm one of those people where if you give me options, I'd like to work with each option or work through each option to just figure out which is best for me from there. So when it comes to topics like racism and anything like sex or anything like that, when it comes to historical, I would love to know the background of it, where it comes from, what it is, right? All that information. Then from the situational storytelling, being able to apply certain experiences of my own through a character who's been through certain things like that, and as they're going through their journey, right, seeing some of the connections that I've made, right, and then racism on the level of itself, right, racism has its own thing, racism, in the definition, in what it is today, right, there's a lot of values in that. So I think all of it for me, right, I think I like to just work with, the options presented to me.
And then check in on their feelings and pay attention to their body language, right? That's so important. If we're looking at, is it getting the impact that we want? Well, one of the things is, what are the feelings that are coming up and how are they doing with expressing that? And as I'm looking at their body language, as we're covering something maybe that's a little heavy, or are they absorbing it through their body? Are they telling me that it's uncomfortable? And if it's uncomfortable, am I checking in with them to find out if it is, so that, again, that our children get used to understanding that they can still have a conversation even if they're uncomfortable, that they can talk through the discomfort or at least be able to say that they're uncomfortable, right? That's really important. And then this one, I love to get comfortable with silence and make pausing okay. We are incredibly afraid of silence. So recognizing and regarding silence as a place where active work can happen, that it doesn't have to all be spoken, that it actually can be worked through with silence, making pause okay, that we don't have to always shoot an answer out there quickly, that it's okay to actually pause and take our time in conversation. It helps with really getting our thoughts about what we want to say. It helps with tuning into what we're feeling in the moment and how we're reacting because of those feelings. But the fear of silence and that pause really creates that tension for our children, where they feel like they have to say something or they have to just withdraw from the conversation because silence is not being met with reverence. And then to encourage them to ask questions throughout by planning where you might stop. If you had planning to have a conversation, right, through a book, that as you've read it, as you're reading it ahead of time, you're looking at places that you might want to stop and pause, that you might want to ask questions, or that maybe they'll want to stop and pause and ask questions, but not so much anticipating where they'll want to, but just noticing this might be a place, right, where they may end up having questions or pausing to really think about it, but doing that by really planning it out so that you know the places that you want to stop and ask particular questions so that you can listen deeply. Okay, so we're going to breathe. Because that's a lot. We've taken in a lot, and we're at the place where we can really go for some questions and answers. First question is, do you have ideas of how to help young children understand their privilege? Right? That's a good one, right? That's a good one and a big one. Yeah. So I do have some ideas around that. And one of the things that I think is difficult, as I said, if white children, if white parents are having trouble understanding their privilege, then it's very difficult, I think, to share that with white children. So I think that how you share that is to not start with white privilege when it, because we're talking about racism, but to start with privilege where it's easier to see. So I know for myself that I did not notice my privilege of being an able-bodied person uh, really until Justin was a baby and his brother was in kindergarten, and I had to carry his stroller up or down the stairs. And I said, why don't they have an elevator in this building? And I thought, wait a minute, why don't they have children in wheelchairs in this school? Because there's no way for them to get around. And I felt horrible that it took me that long, you know, of noticing, because Justin came along really, his brother was in first grade. So I spent an entire year going in and out of this school with his brother, not noticing that they didn't have a way for children who weren't able-bodied to be a part of the school, and not noticing that they were missing from the school. So for me, that's an easy in to a conversation about white privilege if I were a white parent, because we start with something that's very easy for them to relate to, and then move into the discussion about having the same privilege, right, as a white person in the world, right? So something like just now we've found out that Crayola is having crayons that are more geared towards skin color, but to really take it to a place where they can notice that there's a lot of white dolls, right? There may be more dolls of color now, but if you line it up in relationship to how easy it is to get a white doll, then you can start the conversation of, it's an example of white privilege, that you can go to the store and expect that there will be white dolls and lots of them for you to choose from. But if you are Black, if you are Native American, right, that you're not going to be able to do that as easily. Their choices are not going to be the same.
Ideas of how to help their children understand. I would say put them in a hypothetical situation in which they're going to see it, right? So from a young person's perspective, if they're in elementary school, right? We were talking about how kids are able to, associate color and meaning, right? And so being able to say, well, have you noticed that when it comes to recess to get picked for something, for a game or something, it's you're picked quicker than a kid who looks different from you, right? Or from there, you could say, depending on, the age, of course, and how much they're really understanding it, you could say even, think about one day when you want to have a job, right? Who's really going to get the position you're looking for? Like these are things in which, it's factual situations that in which race and racism shows up, right? And so really being able to understand that, where that comes from, and the fact that, you really won't experience it as much as someone else, or really at all, from someone else, is really important, because when they're able to see the situation for themselves arise in person, they'll know how to go about it based on the discussion of which you've had. So the next time, your child sees a kid of color who's getting picked last, or who's not getting picked at all, they can immediately go say, hey, let's have, this kid come join us, for, whatever their name is. Let's have them join our team. Let's have them join your team, or they can come, or I can sit out and they can come in, right? And from there, they're able to see the situation that they've talked about and the hypothetical that they've talked about in person, and know from there how to go about it. And I think all from that will just show privilege, privilege in itself.
I will also want to say that I think that something that is really easy is if in the United States, and you can look at it from Canada, but if you show picture of our politicians, right, our senators and our Congress people, you're going to see that the vast majority, it's not even very small majority, the vast majority are white. And so to say, to notice that there are a lot of white people here, right? And why do you think that is? I think it's really important. They might not know. And the fact that they don't know is an example of white privilege. They don't have to notice it, that it actually is accepted as just normal, right? It's not a question that children ask. It's not even a question that teens and tweens ask. If they are shown the picture, and in fact, there are many white adults, if they're shown that picture, it just seems normal. That's what it should be. And if they have an answer, if they're really courageous enough to tell the truth, many of them think it's because people of color are inferior. They're not smart enough to be a part of Congress, right? Or to be senators. That's what it is. Or, well, there's one or two, that's good enough. So really being able to show in pictures where this shows up is a good first step. But I also think, like I said, the other previous suggestions are really important. Okay, how do you explain, wow, these are good. How do you explain the concept of systemic racism to a child? Or do you? Yes, you do. That's an absolute answer. Yes, you do. And you can start young. I say if you're going to start young, then start with play. So I know myself, I loved play. I loved to be different things when I played. So you can be the banker, right? You can be the principal at a school. You can be you can be somebody who's renting an apartment, right? So you can do different stations in life, and you can have them come and say, I want a place to live. I want to get an apartment. And you, as the adult who is modeling systemic racism, will say, no, you can't get this apartment. And then the next station is the bank, right? And so I want money, give me money, right? I mean, talking kids speak, they might say they want a loan. You could teach them what a loan is, but I want money, right? No, you cannot have money, right? And so at each station, it's no, 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 right? And then you can talk about the fact that what did it feel like to have all of those no's, right? And so if you are a Black person, that this is a part of your life, that in all of these different places, you keep hearing no, right? And that's because of systemic racism. And again, that's a big word, but you can just start there with like all of the different places that are important in life. You keep hearing no. That's a great place to start, because they know what that feels like. Like, why do you they'll probably even say it to you after like the second or third no. Why do you keep saying no, right? Because it doesn't feel good to hear that, but it's a great way for them to learn. So that's what I would say about that one. The next question is, what are the best sources for teaching the true history to a child, since I have now learned it doesn't get shared in schools? I love that she has just now learned that. And we tell our kids from little, you're not going to learn your history in school. And so first of all, what I would say is go to the source more. So look for history from Native American perspective. Look for history. So that means people who are Native American writing the books. Look for history, from African Americans. But look for the source. And it's interesting because you have to start to confront racism and white privilege when you do that, because the reason that it wasn't done before, number one, as you said, you believed the history that was being taught to you, but also racism teaches that we're not as smart, we're not as educated, we don't know as much, so you don't buy books from Black authors or from Native American authors because they're not scholars. They aren't qualified to teach this. And so just to even confront that piece of it, right, those two pieces, it was hidden, and that racism teaches us that they're not qualified to teach us on this anyway. But that would really be, for me, that your first place that you start looking for African American authors. There's so many out there that are writing about history and teaching history. And as I said, there are books now for children about racism, about historical events that are being written by Black authors, Native American authors, Latino authors, Asian. I mean, there are books that are written. And that's where I would say that you want to go to and stay away from the books that are written by white authors for now, because you've already read most of those, most likely. So start a new library around this. It's a really good question, and it's a really, I have to say, it's so interesting to me to see so many of my clients who are white, so many of my friends who are white. I post a lot on American history that's been omitted, and they are just in shock that they did not know any of this. And it really affects the way that they have looked at African Americans all these years. Like, there are so many of my white friends who had no idea that we had our own communities. Over and over again, we started our own communities and we were thriving. And then because white people were angry at us for thriving, they would make up something like, oh, this Black person looked at a white person wrong or did something to a white person as a means of justifying tearing down and burning up our communities. It's really important to get that history from the people who are living it, who know it. Okay, and then another question is, if you live in a very homogeneous and white area, do you have ideas of how to help put yourself in a situation where you may be able to build experiences and friendships with people of all races? I love that you, Jolene, specifically looked for a school where there were all kinds of people there and international. And I think that is really important. And yes, it's true, every white person may not have that option, but that's certainly one way to do it. The other thing is, listen, take advantage of the horrible situation of COVID and having to shelter in, and discover all the different communities online, because there are other white families that are looking to have experiences in diverse communities. So there are play groups that are popping up. There are story time groups that are popping up, and people are creating friendships in those groups. And so there are white people who are organizing groups where your children can experience and really have friendships, and as families that are committed to learning about this topic, that you're also committed to really having a community or developing and starting a community that gets to share on this and talk about it. Because if you're living in an all-white neighborhood, chances are there aren't many experiences with people of color. And then if there are some few, nobody wants to be a token. Nobody wants to be that family that you've chosen to be friends with so your children can have a Black friend, right? And I've seen that time and time again. And it is really crushing because the friendship never really develops because it's not based on friendship. It's based on having that status of, I have a Black friend. And often it doesn't even extend to the friendship of a family, right? It's the kids, and the parents really aren't interested in having the friendship with the family. So I would say right now is a time where there's a lot of online stuff that's going on. And so to really make a commitment to look for how do you get involved in that and be that. I can tell you that the community that I belong to with Jennifer Kem is such a diverse community, and most of it has been developed online. Yes, we all are coached by her, but the friendships have been developed online. And my white friends who live in all white areas, for them, this is the first time they've been in a community with so many people of color. And it was actually this experience that started the awakening for them, that, wow, I really want to be around more people of color. I just don't have the opportunity right now to live in that diverse community. So we have this question of, this person has started as a white woman to wear a mask that says Black Lives Matter. And she's had the opportunity to experience Black people who have said, I love that mask and thank you for that mask. But she hasn't had the opportunity to have someone come up to her and say, all lives matter, stop wearing the Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. And she said, I just really, I want to know what to say if that happens. And I'm glad you want to know what to say if that happens, because if you're already wearing the mask, you ought to have had some time to sit with yourself to prepare, like, what will I say? So I'm glad you came to us with that question, because I want you to be prepared. Well, first of all, I'm kind of a witty person. I'm kind of a person that can form wit with a question. So my first thing is to say, well, if all lives matter, then we agree that Black lives matter, right? I mean, we're in agreement here. Black lives matter if all lives matter, right? That would be my statement first, because that is absolutely going to stop someone in their tracks, because then they're going to say either yes, they're in agreement, or they're not. But what they're most likely going to reveal is that they believe your mask actually says only Black lives matter. And that is really important to point out. There is no only on this. This is a simple statement that Black lives matter. And so if you're saying all lives matter, then you're agreeing that Black lives matter. Now, why I've chosen to single it out is because as I look around, Black lives are not mattering to a lot of people. And that is shown in things like, right, the police brutality. I mean, like, then you can have that conversation. But I think it's really important to point out to them that if you're saying that, then you're not disagreeing with me. And if you're saying that and you are disagreeing with me, then it's because you think there's an only before the word Black. And it's really important that you understand that it isn't that. I think I loved, actually, it was a demonstration when Justin was in middle school, and the young people came together afterwards to talk about it. And one of his white male friends said, my mother explained it to me this way. She said, you don't go to a breast cancer event and say all cancer matters. You are there because you are specifically focusing on breast cancer, which is a horrible thing. And it matters that you focus only on breast cancer. And you're not going to point out that there's other kinds of cancers and we shouldn't be focusing on breast cancer, right? So he says, so that's what we're doing here. is that we're focusing on the fact that Black lives really do need to matter, and they don't seem to matter, even when we say all lives matter, right? If we're saying all lives matter, then you have to believe that they do. Black lives matter. So you can't be mad that I'm pointing out that we're focusing on Black lives matter. So that would be what I would say to you. Hoping this was helpful, and I know it was a lot of fun for me, especially fun for me to be able to do this with Justin. It's like so rewarding, and I'm so proud that you are with me. And do you want to say any closing words?
I mean, just like I say, it's an honor. This is life's work. This is, serious stuff. It's serious stuff that people need to know. And, there are people who are looking for this information and just want the information and want to live by it, but just don't have the steps towards getting it. And so to be able to lay down a foundation for anything, for anyone, for me, is a blessing.